The common theme right now across most of Bulls Nation, or the trendy take we see on the Twitter line, is that the Bulls need to blow up their roster, cut their losses, trade their stars, start fresh, and try to tank for Wembanyama, and really just try and tank so as to keep that draft pick for which they owe Orlando that is only top 4 protected. And while I already made a video talking about how the Bulls blowing up their roster and effectively tanking makes zero sense given the circumstances they find themselves in, as well as not being able to control whether they can keep that pick and the low odds of them being able to actually keep it even if they do tank. But aside from my disagreement on the strategy of just tearing everything down, the stretch of games that the Bulls are going to be going through in December is going to be the defining moment of their season and how they choose to pivot going forward based on how they perform during these games. And that's what we'll be talking about in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I mentioned this before, but according to basketballreference.com, the Chicago Bulls have had the hardest schedule to date in the NBA. And strength of schedule is, of course, measured by a number of factors, looking at the record of your opponent, the quality of matchups between your opponent. In other words, is the team you're playing fully healthy with their best players, or are they not? And also a combination of road games versus home games, back-to-backs versus having multiple days off, all of that. And based on the algorithm being used, the Bulls have had the toughest schedule to date. So yes, that is somewhat encouraging, because it would be different if the Bulls were trash and at the bottom of the East, and they also have one of the easiest schedules. It also tells you that their schedule is eventually going to lighten up a bit, and that starts with the stretch of games they have before them coming up. Now, make no mistake, just because the Bulls have had one of the harder schedules in the league, it by no means excuses their poor play. They should not be sitting 12th in the East with a record of 9-14, and they should not be struggling to string together wins even against some of the worst teams. Like, the Bulls have still lost to the Magic, Spurs, and the Thunder so far this year. Let's not forget that. And that same sentiment applies over this next stretch of games, that the Bulls have no excuses and really no choice if they actually want to even find their way into the playoffs. And at this point, I've said it so many times, even before the season started, every game is so critical when the margin of error is so slim, and the Bulls have already lost so many games that it's going to be a massive uphill climb for them to even be able to make the playoffs, let alone just making the play-in. So when you take a look at the slate of their next few games, really starting from tonight, where they play the Wizards at home, all the way until the Christmas Day, after Christmas Day I should say, where they'll be taking on the Rockets, this is a big stretch of winnable games. Tonight, going up against Washington, who are also in a bit of a slump after having a decent start to the season. Like the Bulls, they've also lost 3 in a row. They've lost 7 of their last 10, and they're also without Bradley Beal. I mean, there really is no excuse for the Bulls to lose this one, especially after a long break and being back at home. The Bulls nearly won that first game against the Wizards in DC in the second game of the season when DeMar missed that buzzer beater, and actually the Bulls likely would have won the game, as the last 2-minute report came out that DeMar actually was fouled on that buzzer beating 3 and actually should have been awarded 3 free throws as a result. Then you look at the rest of the games. Dallas, they're a good team. They have one of the best players on the planet, Luka Doncic. That's going to be a tough assignment for Caruso, but even Dallas also struggling. They're 9th in the West, sitting 500. Yet again, another home game, and also a lot of rest between the games against the Wizards on Wednesday to Saturday. The Hawks, another team, also going through some turmoil with Trae Young and Coach Nate McMillan getting into an altercation recently about Trae participating in shoot-around. This is a back-to-back, though, where the Bulls are actually going to be traveling to Atlanta, which, by the way, is so frustrating. Like, the Bulls play 2 games with breaks from Sunday to Wednesday and then off until Saturday, and then they schedule them traveling a back-to-back. But whatever, it is what it is. Then the Knicks, back-to-back home games against the Knicks, yet another middle-of-the-road team. Yes, I'm aware the Knicks have a slightly better record than the Bulls right now, but the Bulls are still the better and more complete team if the Bulls can actually get their act together. And the Knicks, despite being very close in the standings to the Bulls, have actually had one of the easiest schedules to date in the NBA. And I mean, come on now, it's the Knicks. They're the laughingstock of the NBA and have been for decades. You have to beat this team. After that, you've got Minnesota, who will still be without Karl Anthony Towns by that time, who is slated to miss 4 to 6 weeks from that leg injury. The Wolves' experiment of trying to go all in and acquiring Rudy Gobert has been an absolute disaster thus far. Guys aren't happy. They're sitting outside of the play-in in the West with a record below 500. I don't know why that front office didn't see this thing working out and decided to trade their entire future for Gobert, a guy that I wanted on the Bulls, by the way, but not for that much. But either way, the Bulls have to take advantage of a team that is struggling and in disarray, even though that's also been the Bulls right now. And then you look at the rest of the games after that. Heat, Hawks, Knicks again, and the Rockets, who are one of the worst teams in the league right now and in the tank for Wembanyama sweepstakes. I mean, really, you look across the list of these next 10 games. 10 crucial games for the Bulls to get back on track in taking on some easier competition than what they've faced thus far. I see no reason why the Bulls can't, at a minimum, Go 7-3 over the stretch. Sure, there might be a bad loss or two to one of these underperforming teams, but then maybe they also counter that with a win against one of the better teams like the Mavs or the Hawks, kind of like when no one thought the Bulls would be able to beat the Celtics and Bucks in back-to-back games. 7-3 is reasonable. Really, even 8-2 over the stretch is doable as well. At 7-3, it would put the Bulls back at 16-17, just one game below 500, which still isn't good going into January, but hey, one step at a time. We can't expect the Bulls to go on an insane winning streak, kind of like the 9-game winning streak that we saw them do this time of year last season. But here's the thing, if the Bulls lose most of these games, hell, even if they go 5-5 of the next 10, they remain 5 games below 500 or worse, then yeah, I'll be in the blow it up camp. Because at that point, if you can't even beat some of the middle tier and lower tier teams in the league who are also going through their own issues and growing pains, and if you're still seeing the same style of play that we've been seeing from the Bulls, heavy ISO, long mid-range game, shooting very few threes, shooting threes at a poor rate, scoring very little in the paint, little ball movement, little player movement, if we're still seeing all of that, and the Bulls aren't stringing together wins, then yeah, this roster is doomed and you have to make the necessary adjustments before it gets out of hand and try to get any value that you can for the assets that you have. Yes, that means looking at trading DeMar DeRozan. Yes, that means looking at trading Vucevic before he walks for nothing in free agency. And that even means looking at what Zach Lavine can potentially get you, even though you just signed him to a 5-year max contract and you can't trade him until January 15th. You have to look at all the possibilities and avenues to do a complete overhaul, because if by the end of these next 10 games, the Bulls are sitting, say, 13-19, or worse, 12-20. Still no possibility of Lonzo making a return, and at that point, it's large enough of a sample size to say it's time to make drastic changes. Until then, though, I'm not about this team blowing it up. I think it's wildly premature given we're only 23 games into the season with a lot of basketball left to play, given the Bulls have had the hardest schedule in the league, and also given the fact that the Bulls, for the most part, their record could be a lot better had they just been able to close out a lot of their close games, which drastically impacts this entire narrative and sentiment of wanting to overhaul the roster. Again, keep in mind, if the Bulls finish with the worst record in the league, which they won't, but even if they did, there's a 48% chance that they would still have to give up their pick to the Magic, as there is a 48% chance of even the worst record holder to fall out of the top 4. That's a high risk for a team that has very little wiggle room for building for the future with their lack of picks. You really can only do so if it's in dire circumstance and we're simply just not there yet. But the next 10 games, that will make it abundantly clear which direction the Bulls should go in. And my hope is this group finally starts getting their act together. We finally start hearing some positive news on the Lonzo Ball front, that he's progressing towards a return in January. Otherwise, if we keep seeing what we have been, yeah, it's going to be hard to watch the rest of this season. Let me know what you guys think of the current state of the Bulls, how you think they'll do over the course of these next 10 games. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.